Welcome everyone to Cloud Native Live, where we dive into the code behind Cloud Native. I'm Taylor Dolezal, head of ecosystem at the CNCF, where I work closely with end users as they navigate their cloud native journeys. Every week, we bring a new set of presenters to showcase how to work with cloud native technologies. They will build things, they will break things, and they will answer your questions. In today's session, Jason Morgan has joined us to talk about Service Mesh in Production 101 with Linkerd. This is an official live stream of the CNCF, and as such is subject to the CNCF Code of Conduct. Please do not add anything to the chat or questions that would be in violation of the Code of Conduct. Basically, please be respectful to all of your fellow participants and presenters. And with that, I'd love to kick it over to Jason to get us started on today's presentation. Jason?
Yeah, hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on again. I'm excited to talk to everybody about Linkerd in production. So got some slides here. I'm going to do my best to not go back to the slides after one more because it's got my headshot. So see, I'm there, here, this guy. You can find me on Twitter, GitHub. Not that I can see any reason you'd want to find me on GitHub, or on the Linkerd Slack as @Jason. And probably on the CNCF Slack. So, all right, that's it for slides. What we're going to talk about today is how to run Linkerd in production. So the first thing, if you're out there, we're gonna get posted in the chat is Buoyant, the company I work for, the people that make Linkerd, publish a runbook of how to do Linkerd in prod. Right, and like we do a couple things that are pretty important specifically. Right, we talk about things you need to be aware of before you deploy, potential gotchas, and things to check on. And that's essentially what today is going to be about. Sound good to folks?
Yes.
All right, well, it sounds good to Taylor. That's that works. Hi, Shivansh. All right, so great. Oh, one other thing, a great thing to check out if you like this stream. We also have a this is based off a webinar that one of my colleagues, Charles Pretzer, did. That's a recorded Service Mesh Academy presentation. And let me just open that up. Nope, wrong. Sorry, totally wrong thing. Service Mesh Academy. There we go. This thing, Linkerd in production. So let me just copy this link, hand it to these folks to paste in the chat. So it's just a video that like dives into basically everything I'm going to do today, but in more depth. So let's start. What this is, right? We're not going to do an introduction to Linkerd or an introduction to what Service Mesh is, right? I'll give you a quick overview because I feel like that's useful every single time I do it. A service mesh is kind of a weird name for a network of a bunch of little load balancers that sit between your applications and do stuff with your application traffic. So they intercept and then use your application traffic to do stuff. Typically, that stuff is adding some security by encrypting the traffic and identifying the various parties in the conversation. It makes it a little bit easier to monitor by adding some standard observability where you can see things like success rate, saturation, latency for your applications. And then it can improve on the reliability of your service-to-service communication. So that's the very fast service mesh definition. And that's as far as I'm going into that. This is also not going to be like a super deep dive into how do I do certificate rotation or even how do I do monitoring. I'm going to tell you a little bit, right? But if you want to learn more about debugging, monitoring, anything like that, go check out that Service Mesh Academy link. The resolution. Oh yeah, sorry, Jonathan. Is this a little bit better? Hopefully, and I'll make all of them a little bit bigger. So if you check out the whole Service Mesh Academy link, you'll see all like the Buoyant webinars, right? And of course, there's Linkerd 101 on this channel too. Yeah, and so that's the start. So before we do anything else, right? Let's talk about what do you need to do before you go to production? And like, I'm a huge fan of checklists. I just think it helps me not forget things that I shouldn't forget, right? Fonts are not super clear. I can't do anything about the font, but I'll take that to feedback to the people that do the website because, yeah, I guess I don't know a ton about fonts. Sorry about that shell script code. So yeah, I think a checklist is really handy. The production runbook here has a bit of a checklist built into it. The things I would tell you is one, first off, look at this runbook before you go to prod with Linkerd, and look at a runbook for your thing, whatever your product is, before you go to production, right? Or build one yourself if there isn't one that already exists. Two, Linkerd. Let's just check out Linkerd and the Linkerd install command. So if I do the Linkerd CLI, it's got this install mode, and if I look at help, it's got some flags I can set, right? Bunch of stuff to say here about the flags, but an important one is Linkerd has a HA mode for installing. This doesn't go by default. It forces you to have at least 3 nodes in a cluster if you want to install Linkerd in HA mode, because Linkerd's HA mode splits the control plane components into 3 replicas instead of just 1, right? And those replicas have anti-affinity rules on them, so they can't run on the same node, right? So like the bare minimum you want to do if you're running Linkerd in production is have 3 replicas and have them not on the same node. So if one node goes down, you can you can recover, right? The other thing HA mode does that is awesome is it will enforce a policy that your pods can't start if the Linkerd proxy injector isn't running, right? So let's talk about why that is just real quick, right? If you're using a service mesh because MTLS is important or required for your environment, right? Like I need to ensure that every app, when it's talking from app to app, is using identified and encrypted channels, right? Where both parties are mutually identified and that the data they send is encrypted, right? If that's a regulatory requirement, you don't want your pod to start if it's not getting a proxy injected with it, right? So the HA mode will say, hey, pods, you can't start if the Linkerd proxy injector isn't working. Sounds nice, right? But maybe you see like where this might be a problem, right? If it does it cluster wide, there's some components that don't use the proxy, 1, and 2 need to work before the proxy can work, right? Specifically, if you have like a CNI that runs in its own namespace, right? Or you have the kube system. Both of those are going to need to be available and ready before Linkerd starts. So when you install with HA mode, you want to be sure that you annotate kube system and you annotate like these like infrastructure specific namespaces with a little note. And I forget what that is, but that's why I have my slides here. Let's go HA mode. There we go. There's this little annotation you can put in, and I'll try and get that sent to the chat. Oh yeah, sorry. Here's it in slideshow mode, right? This hold on, I've got a little laser pointer. Come on, buddy, please work. No, it's not going to do it. Anyway, got a little annotation we'll put in the chat. Oh, great. That basically tells a namespace. Oh, Thomas Rucker is asking if this is the CNCF Finland event live stream. It is not, I don't think. Taylor, do you want to?
Yeah, it is not, but I could definitely check on that and get you some info, Thomas. Yeah, sorry, you're in the wrong classroom.
All right. So anyway, quick bit about HA mode. Be sure that you've got the right thing installed. The other thing I would say is if you're installing Linkerd and you're going to production, right, consider using Helm and not the Linkerd install, right? So Linkerd CLI is great, right? It's handy. It's a good tool that you'll want to use, especially in production. as you debug things or get to know your environment, right? But the Linkerd Helm charts are what we see most folks that are running Linkerd in production use. And Helm has a bunch of features that make it easy to, or make it extremely consistent when you upgrade and you install. And it's very compatible with your version control system. Like the Linkerd CLI, say what you want about it, right? But in general, like it puts you into a bit more of an imperative mode, right? I am saying, hey, cluster, go do this, that, or the other things. Oh, thanks, Gerald. So Gerald just posted the link to the Linkerd runbook. So thank you for that. But it kind of gets you in this, like, telling the cluster what to do, right? Like in an imperative fashion, where what you really want to be doing is something like Helm to do it in a bit more of a declarative way. And I guess it's not really imperative, but it feels more of that method. And I'll tell you, like, I see most people that are successful with Linkerd and prod using Helm, and we recommend it. And store your configs. Take your values file and all your overrides that you use for the Helm chart and store that in version control. Like, this is a heavy ask for all you out there. Please store your configs and all your values in version control. Like, it's crazy clutch. And if you lose that, like, you could find yourself in a bad spot. The other one I'd say is use your own image registry, right? Like when you go pull images, and in fact, let's do a Linkerd install real quick. Install -- ignore cluster. Let's just grep. Right, we're gonna see a bunch of stuff, but this URL is the path to our image, and it's using an internet-based registry. Oh, hey, Sam. Great to see you. It's using an internet-based registry that, like, might be available, but it might not be available, right? Run your own registry if you want stuff to be highly available. It's a great call. There's a ton of great open source registries. I'm wearing my VMware shirt today. Check out Harbor. It's awesome. There's a bunch of other great ones too. Like, I'm not telling you Harbor is better than your other registry, but it's a good one, and I like it personally. Yeah, run your own registry. It's really worthwhile. And again, using Helm, you can replace the URL so that you've got it pointing to your local. And then if your local registry is not available, like, go talk to the person that runs local registry. Be like, hey, come on, let's get this going. I got a production deploy that's held up, right? You get all that accountability internally. After the registry, right? A couple things that you want to plan for, right? Like, Linkerd is good and it's stable. In general, people find that it just works, right? Which is just really good, right? It's a pretty good thing to say about the project, right? But, like, at the end of the day, nothing always just works, right? Like, you have to monitor and alert on your Linkerd environment. You have to know what you're going to do for that, right? I'm making sense so far. Taylor, is this all resonating with you, right? Like, it's kind of simple advice, and we'll do a bit more in demos in a minute, but I just want to make sure that y'all are thinking about this, right? Before you go. So make a plan for monitoring and alerting. That runbook will help you think about it. There's I'll dive into a whole section on monitoring and alerting in a bit. Also, you don't need to become deep Linkerd experts, right? Like, one of the things that we say positively about Linkerd is that you don't need to develop deep Linkerd expertise. But how do I know if Linkerd is healthy on a cluster? Well, I know enough to just go in here and run Linkerd check, right? And it's going to tell me what the current state of my environment is, right? But you need to know how Linkerd works. What can you do if something goes wrong, and how do you debug it? And then really be aware of and think about how you're going to do upgrades, make a plan. And I'm going to talk about what that plan should look like, and understand the certificate hierarchy. So this is one that I just want to dive into really quick. And this might be good for a little whiteboard. So hold on, I'm just going to try and get my laser pointer to work because I absolutely love it.
Be great if they put the replace batteries function in there at some point in time.
Well, yeah, it was fully charged yesterday, but all right, man, I'm gonna give up. So here I've got what's a fictional Kubernetes cluster. I have an ingress, a bunch of proxies. So these proxies are the data plane, and together the data plane and the control plane make up your service mesh, right? And we're gonna need, for all these things, there are 3 tiers of certificates. There is a root certificate, which isn't ever going to be in the cluster, right? But is the source of the trust that everything else uses. That when you install Linkerd, especially when you install it with the Helm chart, you're going to be forced to generate an intermediate CA. So a certificate authority that you'll give to the control plane, and that the control plane will use to create and rotate the certificates for your workloads. And then every workload is going to get its own certificate, right? That will be generated by the control plane. And used to positively identify that workload, right? And if you watch some of the Linkerd overviews, we'll talk about what these certificates are and a bit more about how they work. But you need to have a sense of what certificates are involved, what you're going to use for your root CA. Are you going to generate your own? Are you going to use the corporate CA that you've got, in your environment? Or are you going to build one that's purpose built for this environment? And are you going to rotate that root CA, right? And that's a decision you have to make. I see folks that are like, hey, we're going to rotate that root certificate every year, right? Which is not like a painless process, but something that they are okay with, right? Or we see folks that are like, hey, we're going to treat the root CA for our service mesh like we treat the root CA for our Kubernetes cluster. We're going to set it to a lifespan that should outlive the cluster, and that's it, right? And we'll go from there. And if you're going to do multi-cluster, you need to share a root CA between clusters in order to do multi-cluster. And if y'all want, we can do a multi-cluster live stream, because that's one of my favorite topics. Why? Wait, one second. Sorry, my Amazon spy device was talking to me. Okay, so certificates. Figure out what you're doing. Great tool to create it. Man, Gerald, you are like hitting it up, man. Thank you so much for this feedback. All right, so you need a plan for certificates, and then have a plan for how are you going to rotate certificates in your environment, specifically this intermediate certificate. Most of the time when you see our docs, we'll tell you make this last about a year, but I know folks that make it last 7 days. I know folks that make it last 10 years, right? You have to decide, how are you going to rotate it? Check out tools like Cert Manager, right? It's super handy. It's worth using. It'll work with whatever other certificate authority you have. Well, not whatever. It'll work with a lot of certificate authorities. It makes it pretty straightforward to programmatically generate the intermediary certificate. And then, of course, plan out the integration with your certificate authority. Quick check-in. Making sense so far? That's most of what I'm going to say about certificates. So, folks, like if this is like a topic where you're wishing for way more depth, check out. I don't think you do, Gerald. This has been fantastic. If you want a deeper dive in this, go check out that Service Mesh Academy link that you saw earlier. Will talk about Linkerd and certificate authorities, and there's talk in there either that exists now or that we're getting ready to do fairly soon in a deep dive into certificate management with Linkerd. And also check out the production run book, because we'll talk about it. All right, so that's certificates. Quick talk about HA mode, right? This control plane here is really like a couple different components, but when you install something in HA mode, we make multiple replicas. So let's just look at this. So let me change my namespace. Okay, I can't complete that. So I'm now in the Linkerd namespace. You can take a look at our pods, where we can see that I've got 3 copies of each of my components. I also have resource requests and limits set for all of these things that are fairly reasonable, but they may not be. They're not going to work for every single environment, right? So one thing I'd ask you to do is set up monitoring, look at your environment, test out the things that you do before you make changes to your production cluster, and see, do you have the resource requests and resource limits that work for your application? Are you seeing pods get killed, right? Like, if you are, like, do something about it, right? And speaking of which, we're going to talk about debugging like right after monitoring, and I'm going to show you a little bit of how we're going to use the CLI to plug in. Still okay as far as content? Any questions so far, folks? The more I'm interrupted, the better. Like I can talk for hours if you leave me to it.
Yeah, please let us know if you have any questions. Just feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll get them asked. If Jason doesn't see it, I'll be sure to raise it up to him as well.
Cool, thanks. And yeah, you interrupt me too, Taylor. If there's anything you want me to double tap on.
Absolutely.
Going back, be sure that you set that annotation at a minimum on your kube system namespace to allow pods in that namespace to start, even if this proxy injector isn't working, right? So there's a rule now in place because we installed it in HA mode. There's a rule that says, don't let a pod start if this isn't running, right? But like if this service, all right. So we have a question from Gayan Raj. And I'm sorry, I can't explain Knative. Yeah, but happy to, if anyone wants to see Knative and Linkerd at some point, we could also do a live stream on that. But anyway, this thing relies on the kube system. If kube system won't start without it, and it won't start without kube system, you get into a vicious cycle. Oh man, we're getting amazing questions. So let's hop in. Gian Raj again, Linkerd and Istio, you typically are using one or the other, right? Like they're competing products, right? So they're in general you'd use one or the other. I'll tell you to use Linkerd, but I work for Point, so that's my job, right? But like Istio is also a great tool depending on your use case. Shell script code wants to know how proxy container injection work and how kubectl applied detects it as a chain. Yeah, awesome. Amazing question, right? So the way proxy injection works is we just set an annotation. So we set annotation. Oh, am I choppy or am I okay? Sorry, my thing started looking choppy. You set an annotation and you can set it on one of three levels. You can set it on the namespace. You can set it on the actual workload object. So when I say workload, I mean deployment, deployment, stateful set, or daemon set. I think those are the workloads that I can think of. So you set an annotation inside the specification that says, hey, please inject this workload with the Linkerd proxy. And you set any rules on it that you need. Like you get to tell it to like skip certain ports or treat certain ports in a special way, like whatever you want to do. But the annotation is the way that you set up injection. So going back to your question, the way the change gets detected is the object gets modified. And when the object gets modified, the Kube API sees that change, and then it automatically tries to roll the pod when you put it on the workload, right? When you put it on the namespace, when you put it at the namespace level, once it won't take effect until the pod gets restarted for whatever reason, right? So if you want to annotate a namespace, go in. In fact, I think I've got emoji votes up. Let's just do this. Kget pods -a. Oh, emoji vote is already injected. Okay, well, less good. But I could set it on the namespace. So let's actually just, well, I'm not going to do it now because I'd have to like look stuff up and that would be annoying. But you can set on the namespace level and just do a kubectl rollout restart on the namespace, and everything will pick up the proxy. And I think that's all your questions, shell script. But please let me know if that works. Mr. Feed, I think. Sorry if I said your name wrong. Is the Viz component normally installed in production environments? Oh man, that's a great question. I'm just going to park that because I'm just about to go into it. Short answer is yes, it is commonly installed, but it's not commonly installed with just a vanilla installation. And I'll dive right into that. Thomas Rucker, I think. Ken Raj is asking some interesting questions in here. I love it, man. Thank you. So Thomas Rucker, I hope I said that right. While I'm here, would anyone happen to know when the non-Kate's Linkerd? Oh yeah, yeah, man. So I can actually answer that. Well, I can answer that as well as anyone can publicly answer that, because it's not we don't know exactly when Linkerd is going to start supporting non-Kubernetes workload, but the current tentative plan is that the 2.13 release, or somewhere around the 2.13 release of Linkerd, we should include the ability to run Linkerd outside of a Kubernetes cluster. And there's a ton more I can say about that. And please feel free to connect with me. I'm on Twitter. I'm in the CNCF Slack, the Linkerd Slack, and I'm happy to give you way more details on that if you're interested. I'm not going to answer any of the Istio questions, but Baboos, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say your name correctly here, asked if they can run 2 different service mesh technologies on one K8s cluster. Yes, but also why? That's not a good idea. Oh, Shellscript Code asks if they can hard code the proxy container in the deployment. Probably, but don't do that, right? You want the proxy injector to do its work, right? It's specifically going in, and it's a mutating webhook, right? So that means it looks at the object and then it deliberately mutates the YAML for you on the back end, right? And that process, because if we control the version of Linkerd and the the pod specification in our version controller, whatever our deployment system is, you're going to get the exact same output every time, right? And if you were to try and hard code it, you'd add in a lot of extra work for yourself. It wouldn't add value to your environment, and it would make your whole deployment more brittle, right? So it's something that you could do, but I would recommend against, right? And if you were to ask the community for help and you were doing that, the first thing people would say would be get that stuff out of there and then try again, right? So it'd be setting yourself up for failure. All right, so going back and who asked? Someone asked a great question that I'm going to get to, I promise. Oh, Mr. Feed. So let's hop into your stuff now. So monitoring Linkerd. Monitoring Linkerd. It's something you need to plan for. So if you look at Linkerd, and in fact, I've got a live Linkerd dashboard that anyone, if you feel like looking at it, go check out my Linkerd dashboard. So I know I share this link every time I do one of these, but check this out, right? With this dashboard, you can see a couple things, right? I can see the state of my cluster from the perspective of Linkerd, and this is the Linkerd dashboard, or Linkerdvis, right? It's an extension. It's a separate component from core Linkerd that gives you some cool information about your environment, right? And one of the things that you'll see here is that the Linkerd control plane components are in the service mesh, so that the tools I can use to look at and diagnose my applications, I can use to look at and diagnose my Linkerd install itself, right? And you can see that here, right, Linkerdvis, because I'm not using HA mode on my cluster, some of the pods have restarted and they haven't been injected, right? So I can go do a rollout restart. So here's just a quick little bit of debugging right here, right? So K rollout restart. I didn't get that. Yeah, it's because I'm not talking to you. Watch, every bit of my technology is trying to interrupt me today.
Yeah, deploy service mesh.
Deployed. Agree this. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and, well, it's probably a bad idea to do it right during the, oh, because I'm in the wrong cluster. Sorry. Okay, CTX, GitOps, A, rollout, restart, deploy, -n, Linkerd. This, yeah, come on. There we go. So we're going to lose this. We're going to lose this dashboard for a bit, right? But you can use the tooling, that Viz component, to look at your own Linkerd environments. It's actually really handy. So I would use it when you go to production. But you need more than just Linkerd. And that Linkerdvis component, it by default installs an in-memory Prometheus and Grafana that you can use to pull up metrics, right? And if you've used Prometheus in production, the first thing you should think is, wow, like I bet you an in-memory Prometheus doesn't last for very long, and it doesn't, right? Like you can't rely on that when you go to prod. So you have to have a plan for what are you going to do for collecting the Prometheus data from the proxies, right? You don't need to have Linkerdvis installed to grab the data from the proxies with Prometheus. The documentation on how to use an external Prometheus is out there. It's public. It's a very common procedure, but just make sure that you've seen that. And again, go back to that Linkerd production run book. It will talk about some options you have for getting that data out and some good patterns. Then go beyond that, right? Whether or not you're using Prometheus and Grafana to monitor it, right? It might be wise, depending on what you do for monitoring, to look at a third-party or paid tool, right? There's like Datadog, there's New Relic, there are other monitoring tools. Feel free to put them in the chat. But there are tools out there to make monitoring easier. Also, the company I work for, Buoyant, right? We've made a tool that's a paid tool that you can use to, do a lot of the alerting and monitoring around Linkerd, right? And ultimately, it's there to try and turn it into a bit more of a managed service for you. So if you go into production, you can also do less of this checklist and just pay some people some money. But that's kind of your call here. But no matter what, make a plan for storing your metrics, right? Like all this, make a plan before you're going into prod. Have an idea of what you're going to do before you run into the situation, so you're not scrambling, right? Like Linkerd or any service mesh, right? It is critical path for your applications. So that means if it's suffering, your applications are suffering, and like that's a bad place to be, right? Like you don't want to be on the hook, not understand how do you address this, that, or the other failure scenario as you're losing production traffic. Like that's painful. So plan for alerting and monitoring. When you look at the Linkerd control plane itself, I know, but you're going to be okay, buddy. Well, you'll be okay eventually. Sorry. It's taken longer to come up than it ought to. Anyway, if you look at the Linkerd dashboard and it's healthy, you'll see the success rates for the Linkerd control plane components. And there's no reason that those should ever go... some of y'all are trying to get me in trouble. There's no reason it should ever go below 100%. I want to be clear to everybody on the call, right? Like I work for the company that makes Linkerd. I think Linkerd is a great tool, and I'm going to say positive things about everything we talk about. I'm not going to tell you one or the other. I'd say if you're evaluating service meshes, try some different options, right? And consider what are the things that you care about for the mesh, and evaluate based on that. Linkerd is fast, it's lightweight, and I think it's absolutely awesome. So yeah, make sure that your success rates are never below 100%. Look at the events, so the Kubernetes events in your environment, right? Like if you're seeing control plane components get killed, so out of memory killed, right? Like you have bad resource requests and limits, and you're going to need to address that, right? And please make a plan to monitor your certificates, right? I can't tell you how many times I've seen people come into Linkerd Slack because they've had their issuer certificate expire, right? If this intermediary certificate expires, your stuff's not going to be able to talk anymore. Your workload certificates aren't going to be able to get generated, and that's going to be a big problem because your components aren't going to trust each other anymore. So watch your certs, and again, Buoyant Cloud automatically watches your certs for you and is really aggressive about notifying you. All right, quick hop over to questions. Babu said, sorry, I'm not sure how I'm going to say your name there. If you're using Linkerd with something like Ceph storage, how does it work? I don't know. I don't know a ton about Ceph and the integration, right? So it's like anything else, right? Linkerd will handle your TCP traffic. It's going to do really intelligent stuff with your HTTP and gRPC traffic. and it's going to treat other TCP streams that it's not clear about. It's generally going to treat those as generic TCP trunks, and so you're going to get different metrics off that than you will off something that understands really well. How hard is it to enable trace logs for your sidecar? So actually, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So Fayez, sorry if I said your name wrong there. We'll talk about enabling logs in just a second. So with that, that's my monitoring pitch, right? The long story short is have a plan, check that production runbook because it's got steps, and then just make sure that you understand it well enough that when something starts to happen, like how do I know if a pod is injected, right? Like you should have that answer for yourself, right? Like how do I know when I look at all the pods in my cluster, right? This is on my bigger cluster. I can tell just by looking at it, right? What things are in a good state, what things aren't, right? And how many pods are injected, right? So I can tell that this thing isn't injected because it only has one container per pod, right? Anything that's injected with Linkerd has at least 2 containers. That's one quick view, right? And you should be aware of stuff like that before you go. All right, let me go back to my demo cluster here. All right. So let's talk about debugging. So first off, Linkerd is a Kubernetes tool, right? Let's do this real quick. Sorry. That's Linkerdvis. There we go. Okay, well, there's something weird in my script. Regardless, right? Let's get our pods again. I've got Linkerd running. If I want to debug the control plane, right, like the first thing I do is just go check out the events, right? So I'm in the namespace. So let's just do kget events, right? And we can sort by timestamp, which is a handy one that I always save this command off the side because I never remember the syntax for sorting by timestamp. Oh, wait, it didn't copy. Give me just a sec. Oh, buddy, there we go. So I get events. I sort by the timestamp. Let me make this a little bit smaller, right? Get events. Look through the events, right? Because it'll tell you if something's going on. This is the history of pods in this namespace, right? So like everything else you do in Kubernetes, events, logs, custom objects. Now, for the default Linkerd installation, you don't have any custom objects you need to worry about, right? Yeah, you don't have any custom objects you need to worry about. But using Kubernetes events will get you a lot of details. Checking out the pods, like are all the pods in my Linkerd namespace healthy? Right, well, okay, I've got everything's up and I don't have any restarts. So that's a pretty good start. I can do logs. So let's just get logs for one of the identity pods, right? So, and what are these various components? I've got the destination service, or the destination pods, which tell me about the endpoints and help my proxies pick where to route traffic. I've got the identity service, which is actually generating all those certificates that we need. So it's clutch, right? So let's check out the logs for the identity service. And last but not least, we have our proxy injector, which is getting that proxy out into the environment, right? All important components. So let's see some logs. K-logs, this guy, and right, you have to pick a container, right? So a tip that I use all the time, right? Let's see, is that it? Normally it tab completes, but whatever. You just say type logs and don't type a container. It'll tell you have to pick one of the containers, right? So, we can look at the identity, we can look at the proxy, and we can look at the init container. And let's just talk about all those real quick. So -c, identity. Now this is the default log level, right? And now I need my slides again because I didn't never remember this off the top of my head. So let's just share this real quick. So I can set the log level in a couple different places. Be aware, Linkerdi's control plane used to be all written in Go, and now some components are starting to get written in Rust, and there's some stuff about why it's now easier to do Rust for Kubernetes control plane components, but it has become easier. And so you should expect more control plane components to get written in Rust, because Rust is a really interesting language, and this isn't the time for that talk, but there's some stuff there. Suffice to say, be aware different controllers use different formats for setting the log level. Everything is out there in the documentation, and you can see it all in the Helm chart. In the Helm chart doc specifically, how do you set the log level? In general, you can set it globally at the cluster or per individual workload, right? So just be aware how you want to do it. Typically, what we see people do is leave the default log level and just turn on other log levels as they need it. But that is totally up to your use case and your environment, and feel comfortable customizing. There's no like set recommendation beyond, obviously, the more verbose your log level, the more intensive the logging operation is going to be for your system, right? So be sure that you're compensating for that. So there are different log levels to set, which is the whole point of that story. Again, the messages that we can see here, I can see that certificates are being generated and why. I can see, some information about my issuer cert, whatever, right? Some just generic stuff about this environment. And this is a great place to go if you want to debug what's happening with certificates. And the deeper your log level, the more information you're going to get. So that's the identity service. I could also check out the actual proxy, right? Was it Linkerd proxy? Yeah, Linkerd proxy. Linkerd-proxy, right? This one's actually pretty simple because we don't have a very verbose debug level. If folks are, Juan, also great to see you, Juan. There is, I know there's a New Relic integration. I'm not sure about Dynatrace, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't. I'm just not super familiar with Dynatrace, if I'm being honest. But check them out. And if you're dealing with a company like Dynatrace, New Relic, anybody like that, and you're like, hey, I wish your Linkerd support was better, send them my way. Happy to talk to them and get them to a place where they're comfortable, right? Like it's like anything, right? It's but where has a given organization invested time, and we're happy to make it easier for them to support you. So going back, looking at the proxy logs, I can see data about specifically who's talking to this component and why, right? Like I've got some values about an inbound connection and what's going on. So if I were debugging, put this into a trace mode, output the logs to something, because like even just with no traffic, this is already a lot of data. And if you're seeing traffic and you're in trace mode, there's going to be so much text here that you basically just want to set the log level, save the logs, try and reproduce the behavior that you saw, and then set the log level back to normal, right? That's the basic flow. And last but not least, I want to talk about the init container. So I think it's just Linkerd init. This one's kind of neat, right? So this is your dive into what's happening with IP tables, right? So it'll output the existing IP tables configuration when it starts. It will output what it's doing, and it'll output what's changed at the end, right? So I'm not an IP tables person, so this largely looks like gibberish to me. But if you're trying to debug and you want to get into the IP tables level, this is the place to go to get this sort of information. Making sense? So I'm just kind of pointing you at different places you can go with the tooling. That's the basic Kubernetes tooling. And we also have Linkerd's CLI itself, which gives us some tools that are a bit, they're fairly simple to consume. So first off, and really the most important one, just check your version, right? Like you want to be on the latest patch version for whatever release you're on. And in general, things are N-2. So we're on 2.11. So you can be 2.11, 2.10, or 2.9 today, right? But if you're on 2.9, go be on 2.9.5. If you're on 2.10, go be on whatever the latest 2.10 release is, which I don't remember what that is. So get the latest patch version on what you're doing. Beyond that, we have this handy dandy Linkerd check. Linkerd check can also output data as JSON. So I've seen people put this in a little container and just run it periodically and just dump this to something. right? You've got all kinds of options. Also, another Buoyant Cloud plug, it's got all this data for you, so you can get a sense of what's going on in your environment. But this just tells me, am I happy? And there's some things I can do with Linkerd check beyond just running the generic one. I can check my proxies. I can check my config. I can pre-check before I do an install. It's a great command. Use it. It should be the first step if you suspect something's wrong. Run Linkerd check. I can get proxy metrics with Linkerd diagnostics, and I can get details about the identity or the authorization. All right, so there's a couple other things that I can do as I look in there, but I'm not really gonna go too much further down that road unless anyone has a specific debugging question. Also, hi, Debilly. Hi, Debilly. I hope I said your name right there. Oh, last but not least, tap. Linkerd's dashboard comes with this tap functionality, and tap allows you to check on the state of, or it allows you to see metadata about the requests between your components, right? It's what gives you that, hey, like this path, when I called this path, I succeeded. When I called this other path, it failed, right? Like that data is super valuable. You can access the tap data via the Linkerd CLI. Oops. You can access that data via the Linkerd CLI, Linkerdvis tap, right? I'm not gonna actually do a tap. Oh, thanks, Gerald. I'm not gonna do a tap now, but I could tap a particular deployment, right, and see what requests are coming in. I could tap an individual pod, and I can make really specific rules to filter that down. It provides a default output, and you can also output raw JSON data, which is super detailed. So you've got all sorts of stuff to dive into. So check out Linkerd tap when you're debugging. It's a great one. I want to take the rest of this to just talk about upgrading. Or Taylor, are there any questions that we should address?
I don't think there's too much. I've got some just smaller ones around, like why Linkerd. I know the answer and love the blog post, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. But the reason as to why Linkerd doesn't use Envoy.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So there is a blog post which let me pop up here. Linkerd Envoy. Yeah, why Linkerd doesn't use Envoy. So I'll post that in the chat. Long story short, right? For us, when we wrote Linkerd 2, right, there was a deliberate decision made to write our own proxy, right? And it comes down to, more than anything, not to say anything bad about Envoy, right? But the Rust programming language was kind of becoming more serious at the time that we were rewriting Linkerd. And like at the end of the day, when you're writing a proxy, you want two things, right? You want it to be secure, and you want it to be fast, right? And you want it to be, I guess, three things. You want it to be small, you want it to be secure, you want it to be fast, right? So you need it to be in a compiled language that's not garbage collected, right? Because garbage collection, that process of cleaning out your memory, adds all sorts of safety, which is great. But it also slows things down as it does garbage collection, right? Then after that, right? Then after that, right? Like you want it to be small, right? So again, a compiled language that's very efficient, right, is a big deal. And you want it to be secure, right? So that the downside of writing in C or C++, right, or not having garbage collection is that there are like C and C++ are kind of famous for being hard to manage memory. And like, I'm not a good enough programmer to explain to you why that is or how that works. I wouldn't even consider writing those things because that's hard, and I'm just not that good at it, right? Rust, the compiler for Rust, is specifically built to avoid memory management errors or to catch them as it does the compilation. And again, I don't even know enough about Rust to explain why that is, but dig in for yourself, right? And see what makes sense. But it is, by writing in Rust, we made the Linkerd proxy really performant, really small, and really memory safe, right? So in our view, like, you want it to be fast, small, and secure. And you get that just by using Rust, and or just by using the Linkerd proxy and writing it in the Rust language. And that was worth the cost of having to build our own proxy, right? And it's purpose built, right? Like Envoy's great, but it's general purpose, right? Linkerd's proxy is just does what the control plane does. Like, go try and use it for something else. Like, I saw someone talking on Twitter with one of our maintainers about, hey, could I use your Linkerd proxy to do this? And she's like, no, like just go, like, you can take some libraries we use and build your own Rust proxy. But like Linkerd's proxy, like, only does what the control plane tells it to do. It's not, it doesn't have room for a misconfiguration, right? Like, if you've got something that manages Envoy, like Envoy's hard, right? There's great stuff in there, right? But it's hard. So be sure that whatever you're using, you've seen, that it's really good at configuring Envoy. And watch it, because there are, no matter what service mesh you're using, there are vulnerabilities that will come up due to configuration mismatches between those two projects, which we get to avoid because we have a purpose-built proxy. And they'll talk about that more in the article. All right. I want to just do 5 minutes on upgrading. Can we talk about that real quick? All right. So the first thing I'm going to tell you about upgrading Linkerd versions is test it in non-production. Keep your stuff in version control. Try a dry run of what you're doing, right? And validate that. The second thing I'll tell you is that the data plane, those proxies, will work with up to 2 versions ahead of control plane, right? So you can roll forward the control plane, upgrade the control plane, make sure that you're happy with it, then upgrade your workloads. So do that kubectl rollout restart to get your workloads to the later version. You don't want there to be a long-running version mismatch between the data plane components, those proxies, and the control plane, right? And you can see it in the Kubernetes cluster. And again, if you're using my company's commercial product for Linkerd, it makes it really easy to see. But just check that. Be aware and pay attention. Have a checklist when you do your upgrade. Just like you should have a checklist for going to prod, have a checklist for doing your upgrade, and make sure it includes upgrade your proxies and have your testing. Don't skip versions, okay? Don't go from 2.9 to 2.11 if you're doing an in-place upgrade, right? I want to be very clear about what I mean there, right? There are 2 ways to upgrade, essentially. You can upgrade your live environment, or you can build a brand new cluster at the new version and switch over to the new cluster. I'm not going to tell you which way to do it, right? Because I think ultimately that's going to depend on you. There's a lot of folks making a lot of hay about why GitOps is a great operating pattern, right? And I agree with them, right? But your situation, I don't know everybody's situation. I think if you can do it with fully disposable clusters, do it that way. Don't ever upgrade anything, right? Just deploy new clusters with new infrastructure. Go from there. But if you are upgrading, don't skip versions. And even if you are doing a wholesale new cluster, test before you shift your traffic over. I know this is I know it's obvious, right? But I just want everyone to really, really have that in their mind, right? Because it's an easy place to do yourself. And actually, yeah, Gerald just posted a link to upgrading. The other one I'd say is look at the docs about upgrading versions, right? Specifically, when folks went from Linkerd 2.9 to 2.10, we did a whole bunch of talks and a whole bunch of messaging around, hey, listen, behavior has changed. You could see it in our upgrade notes. We talked about behavior changing, but is everyone reading upgrade notes? I've upgraded things in production without reading upgrade notes before. I'll admit it. Maybe I'm the only one, but I doubt it, right? So consider strongly reading upgrade notes. Definitely test, right? And be aware that in some versions, especially the change from 2.9 to 2.10, there are behavior changes that are significant and that can cause problems if you're not tracking on it, if you're not testing, right? Beyond that, I would again strongly recommend you use Helm. And if you're using Helm, know Helm, right? I want y'all to see something. So this is our Linkerd expert put this together and talked about upgrading, right? And their thing, they talk a lot about Helm upgrade and reuse values versus reset values. I don't have time to dive into it now, right? Just be aware, what are you doing and when, right? And another weird one, if you have to roll back using Helm, you're going to Helm upgrade to the new version you want. And then if you roll back, you're going to Helm upgrade to the old version. Okay, so be aware of Helm and how it works, right? And that's the big story, right? Check upgrade notes, don't skip versions, like with everything else, make a plan, measure twice, cut once, especially when you're dealing with production traffic, right? Like a service mesh sits in between your production traffic. Man, Gerald, I just want to say, hit me up after this on Slack. I'd love to send you a thank you. You posted so many great links. I'm crazy grateful. And yeah, so now I guess we've got a couple minutes. Is it okay to do questions?
Absolutely.
Or do you want to wrap?
No, I'd say, yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll get them asked and answered. And then, yeah, if nobody has any questions, we can go ahead and wrap from that.
I want to make sure that I answered someone had a question that I loved earlier. Yeah, so Mr. Feed there. Yes, or they asked, well, he probably for Mr. Is the Viz component normally installed on production environments? Yes, but the Prometheus, folks externalize the Prometheus. They use their own Prometheus instance and they connect the Linkerd dashboard to that. They don't use the built-in Prometheus that comes with it. But Linkerdvis is handy in production environments. It is, and you can always just install it and uninstall it, right? Like Linkerdvis is much less important than the rest of it, right? So like here in my cluster, I don't have Linkerdvis installed, but even if I installed Linkerd itself with Helm, I can just go in here and type Linkerdvis install, right? Wait for it to be ready, and then uninstall it later if I don't want it, right? Like I can bring it up and bring it down, use it, get some tap data should I want it, right? Pop open a dashboard, right? Let's do Linkerd check, or sorry, Linkerdvis check. Right, so now I'm just checking the Viz extension. So check, again, like I told you, has different modes that it can be in. I can wait for it to be ready. I can pop in a dashboard. I can do the debugging I want to do, and then I can turn it off. I'd say in general, it's not a high cost thing to leave up and running. And I wouldn't remove it unless that's like a particular pattern you have in your organization. But you can just install and remove it as you need it. So let me see if there's any new ones up here. Oh yeah, so shell script code, that's a great one. So the resource utilization comparison, again, right? Like remember, we're the Buoyant folks. Different people will say different things. We did a benchmarking of Istio versus Linkerd, right? Now we used the benchmarking suite from the folks over at Kinvoke, and I'll put the link in the chat, right? So we did it twice last year. This article talks all about the ways we did it, right? But we found when we tested it with this third-party benchmarking suite, not our benchmarking suite, we found that we saw like a dramatic difference in latency and resource consumption with Linkerd versus Istio. But again, do your own testing, right? It's totally worth that. Yeah, Gerald, I will look you up right after this on LinkedIn. So I got you copy and pasted there. All right, Taylor, I'll stop, man. Feel free to do the wrap.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much, Jason. It's been wonderful to have you on again. I love that we keep meeting like this on these streams. So very soon in KubeCon. So just a reminder to all of you attending KubeCon EU, make sure to grab your reservations, both your hotel and your flight, if you're looking into that. I just booked mine recently and saw that things were filling up. So the CNCF is looking at getting a few more blocks on that front, but time is definitely of the essence. It looks like it's going to be a popular conference. It'll be a lot of fun. I hope to see you there chatting about KubeCon. If not, the talks will be available after that. So lots of good sessions, lots of good day zero events. Should be fun. Thank you everyone for joining the latest episode of Cloud Native Live. It was great great to learn from Jason. We enjoyed the interaction and questions from the audience. Always a lively discussion. Next week, we'll be joined by Richard Collins on the topic of workload misconfiguration, the number one security threat when using Kubernetes. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again so much, Jason, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Hope to see you at KubeCon.